We're continuing in the Book of Prayer, level 3. And now we have reached the integral of ruku', bowing. The author says, the obligation of bowing is confirmed by the book, the sunnah, and the consensus. In Surah Al-Baqarah, ayah 43, Allah says, وَرُكَعُوا مَعَ الرَّاكِعِينَ. Bow with those who bow. It's minimum. The least requirement of ruku' is for the able-bodied with average stature to bend over from standing, not for another reason, since such bending is disregarded, until sure that his palms, not his fingers, can normally reach his knees that are not excessively bent. So, the minimum ruku' is for someone who's able-bodied. So we're not talking about someone who's not able-bodied. We're not now going to describe the minimum ruku' for someone who's not able-bodied. Its minimum is for the able-bodied with average stature. Average stature means average arm length, average legs and knees, means average proportions. His limbs and his joints are all in the normal positions, are all of normal stature, normal shape. For the able-bodied with average stature to bend over from standing, yeah, that's clear, not for another reason. His bending over from standing is not for another reason, not for a reason other than to bow in the prayer. Like, not because he saw something on the ground, he wanted to pick it up. So he bent over from standing to pick it up. And then while he was down, he said, why don't I just make this my ruku'? Such bending is disregarded. So he'd have to stand back up and then bend over for bowing, not for something else, not for another reason, until sure that his palms can reach his knees. Not his fingers, not enough for his fingers to be able to reach his knees. His palms have to be able to reach his knees. Can normally reach his knees. Not that they do reach his knees, but that they can. His bending over has to be such that now his palms can reach his knees. So the bending over is by the back. It's by your back bending. How much you have to make your back bend until your palms can reach your knees, until you're sure that your palms can reach your knees. Knees that are not excessively bent. So if the knees are slightly bent, just a little bit, this is still ruku'. But if the knees are excessively bent, that's not ruku'. Meaning, if you bent over with your back to make your palms touch your knees, but your knees themselves are bent so much until this form that you have with your bent back and your excessively bent knees, this position is not ruku' because of your knees being too much bent. So what I'm trying to say to you is, don't ask me which degree of angle, how do I triangulate the angle of the upper leg and the lower leg to know exactly when it's not ruku'. Rather, it's going to be not ruku' when your knees are bent so much that if you were to bend over, this form that you have is not ruku'. So if your knees were just a little bit bent, this form is still ruku', so it's valid. Actually taking hold of the knees with the fingers moderately spread, not together and not far apart, and the knuckles towards the Kaaba, towards the Qibla, and with the shins and thighs straightened. Thighs, yani your upper legs, your shins, your lower legs. These two segments of your legs are straight. A handspan between the male's feet. A handspan when you put when you put your fingers apart. The distance between your thumb and your pinky. That's a handspan. And it was said if you put your middle three fingers down. So I heard it both ways. Handspan is the distance between your thumb and your pinky. So that's how I usually would learn it. That's how I heard it most of the time. And it was said handspan, still saying between your thumb and your pinky with your other three middle fingers down. So that much space between the male's feet, not the female's feet, because the female's going to put her feet together. So actually taking hold of the knees with the fingers moderately spread and the knuckles towards the Kaaba and the shins and the thighs straightened and a hand span between the male's feet and making the back and the neck like one board, like one straight board, the back and the neck, all like one plank is best. So that's more than the minimum. So you have two sentences here. First sentence gives you the minimum. And then the second sentence gives you what's best, what you should add to that. Otherwise, meaning if someone is not able bodied with average stature, one bends over as much as he can for ruku'. If unable to bend, one signals with his head, or else he signals with his eyelids. Or else means if he's unable to do it with his head, he signals with his eyelids. So that's third level. First thing is to bend over. If you can't, use your head. If you can't, use your eyelids. When sitting, one's bowing is by leaning forward until his face is parallel to the ground before his knees. Okay. So sitting, you might be sitting on the floor or you might be sitting in a chair. And so what's the bow from this position? For you to bend over until your face is over the ground that's in front of your knees. So not just over your knees, the ground that's before your knees. If that's not clear for you, let me know, please. When sitting, one's bowing is by leaning forward until his face is parallel to the ground before his knees. And the best is to bend over until his forehead is parallel to his prostration spot. If after bowing, one doubted if he recited, so a person, he was standing before bowing, that's the spot for reciting, and then he bowed, and then after he bent over for bowing, he doubted if he recited. Then he stands erect and he recites. Now, if he remembers that he did recite, then from here he just goes down to sujood immediately because he just goes down to sujood immediately, and the standing that he did, that standing erect that he did to recite because he forgot, but then he remembered, it will be counted as his standing from ruku'. And then he can just go down to sujood immediately when he remembers that, no, actually he did recite. Any question? Rising. But when you say, could you repeat? That's so broad because now I just read like a whole paragraph. So, subhanAllah, I'm not as nice as Ash-Shafi'i. May Allah make me better. Just was reminded of the story of Ash-Shafi'i. When he was telling the mas'ala to one of his students and he didn't understand. So Ash-Shafi'i repeated and he didn't understand. Ash-Shafi'i repeated like 20 times. He didn't understand. Yani, I would have already, I don't know what I would have even said to you before I repeated 20 times. Subhanallah. What you want me to repeat? Everything? But give me more specific question because I have some material I want to try to cover today, inshallah. So I don't want to repeat everything. What did Shafi'i, rahimahullah, say to that student of his after he finally understood? Yani, he told him over and over and over he wouldn't understand. So Shafi'i took him in the house and he kept repeating it to him until he finally understood. And then Shafi'i, rahimahullah, he said, if I could spoon feed you, if I could feed you the knowledge by a spoon, I would do so. So that's a good reminder for me, mashallah. Made me think of all the times I snapped on people. Tayyib, rising. Rising from bowing is the seventh integral because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to the man who invalidated his prayer. So you know that the man who invalidated his prayer, meaning that hadithul musi'i salatah. Inshallah, you've memorized that because you wrote it in your notes. We said it so many times. Hadithul musi'i salatah. I'll write it out for you. Hadith al-musi salatah. Hadithul Musi'i Salatah. That's the name of this hadith. Hadithul Musi'i Salatah. The hadith of the man who invalidated his prayer. He said to the man, ثُمَّ ارْفَعْ حَتَّى تَعْتَدِلَ قَائِمًا. Then rise up, yani from ruku', until you are tranquil, meaning until you are still. This rising up is for one to return to his position prior to bowing. For one to return to his position prior to bowing. So that's why right here the title is not standing back up. I'tidal technically is defined as returning to the position you had before you bowed, not standing back up after bowing, rather returning to the position you had before bowing. So this i'tidal, yani this rafa' is for one to return to his position prior to bowing, not for another reason, like we said before. He's not coming out of his bow for a reason other than completing the steps of his prayer. Like surprise, he was bent over and then a snake came or the like, or scorpion, and it startled him and he stood up out of his bowing position. In this case, he has to go back to his bowing position and then stand up. Therefore, if he were sitting, his rising is to retake his seat. So right there. That's what the i'tidal is, to go back to whatever you were doing before you bowed. So according to that, if you were sitting, then your i'tidal is to retake your seat, because that's what you were doing before you bent over. And it is better to raise the hands while rising. If one rose after settling into bowing, so a person bowed and he was tranquil while bowing. Then he rose up from bowing. Then he doubted about his recitation of Al-Fatiha. So now he's standing, yani, assuming he was standing. So now he's standing and he doubted about if he recited the Fatiha before he even bent over. And therefore he recites right there. And then he remembers that he did indeed recite. Then this rising that he did is valid. So he's just going to go down to sujood from there. It is recommended to start saying Sami'a Allahu liman hamida when starting to rise. So we need to squeeze the Arabic in there. I'll just prepare the brackets now. It is recommended to start saying Sami'a Allahu liman hamida. It means may God answer whoever praised him. May God answer whoever praised him. So it is recommended to start saying Sami'a Allahu liman hamida when starting to rise. And to finish this statement by standing erect, yani by finishing your rising. Yani by completing the rising. So you're going to start the S sound when you start going up. Sami Allahu. And you're going to say this H sound by the time you're finished rising. Hamida. Just like we said about the other formulae said in the other positions. Now, we just talked about bowing and then standing up from or rising from bowing. So it became a habit to say it that way. Because usually that's what's going to be done. Most of the time, you're going to be standing back up. Otherwise, is an exception to the rule. It's valid for us to say that way because it's normal. So we talked about bowing and then standing back up. Now we want to do a digression. Supplicating while standing, including the kunut, du'a'ul kunut. Unless you tell me to stop here and then we can start this from the top next week. What do you say? I know it's a little bit short, but slate too. Because maybe this is long actually. Let me see here. I can maybe squeeze this in a half hour, or we can start it from the top next week. What say you? Next week? Okay. Then inshallah we'll go over Dua al Qunut next week, inshallah ta'ala. Yeah, it probably is better. And we'll suffice with the brief lesson today. Do you have any question I can answer for you?